All right, first up, I'd love to welcome David Shaw from the Faculty of Education, who's presenting and gathering some education experiences of young people who have a parent incarcerated, using a critical realist methodology to look for mechanisms and structures influencing their education. Take it away, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, bless you. An appreciative audience. It's last thing on a Friday. We've got an early mark. We're quite excited, but the energy in the room isn't that good. So we're going to do a thing, which is why I'm sat down. So what I'd like you to do is take your right hand and reach it up as high as you can, then stretch it a little further and ask yourself why you didn't do that the first time. Now I'd like you to take your left hand and with your thumb and middle finger, carefully looking, yes, with your thumb and little finger, really carefully put them on your chin. Oh, some of us were paying attention, some of us fudged it. Okay. Perfect, okay. So it's a little bit, my topic is a little bit heavy and it's adjacent to a little bit of what Carl was saying, and I've heard everybody speak and I can find some of you are going to hate what I'm about to say. Some of you will get the analogy. It's my abstract and my work is now fundamentally based in critical realism, and you'll know when you've met a critical realist because they've already told you. It's like a vegan, you know when you've met a vegan, they've already told you. It's that kind of thing. And I've heard so many parallels where I thought, oh, geez, they could really do with a depth ontology here, or a structured analysis, or some other understanding that comes from critical realism. So hopefully you'll see some parallels in what I'm going to talk about. If you do, great, fantastic. If you don't, then you don't. Okay, so that's the title of my abstract. I've been working on this probably for 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, because my master's was in this area as well. My supervisory team now is Professor Liz McKinley, that some of you will know. I think probably all of you will know. She's a fairly important person, particularly if you want anything to do with ethics. Be nice to Liz. And Dr. Catherine Hastings. And Dr. Catherine Hastings was brought to the university to supervise me because she's a critical realist and we don't have access to critical realists in the university. So I'm really thankful to have both of these people on board. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the Yugambeh people. That this is Indigenous land. We often say this was and will be in the future, but it is Indigenous land right here, right now. I live down the coast a little bit on Bundjalung country in a place called Bogangar, which is beautiful. And I moved here 10 years ago. And this is kind of feeding into my story a little bit and my orientation to the research. So that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. Hopefully the last bit will still be awake. If we are, great. If not, then we can all just walk off into the sunset because it's Friday and we will get an early mark. Okay. So this is me. I'm in both photos. I'm not going to point out where I am in the photo on the left, but in the photo on the right, I'm still wearing a tie. And this is me in the classroom working with a group of students. They're actually pretending to be working. And you can tell they're pretending to be working because the pieces of paper upside down, the laptop's switched off. But somebody came in for a photo. And this is a group of kids who normally work on their own computers. And I've made them come together. And they're really uncomfortable because they're not looking at a screen. They're looking at each other and they're teenagers. And they're like, whoa. But my orientation to teaching and my research really comes from being embedded in education. So I'm in both pictures. If you can see the tall lad at the back in the middle, I'm 2 away from him on this side. I've got a tie on like I have in the other photo, and actually I'm teaching at the same school. I ended my teaching career in the UK as head of faculty in this school where I went to school. And I really understand the value of those deep connections that you have with a place. So when parents' evening rolled around, I'd be greeted by my mates who then had their kids at the school that I was then teaching their kids. And it's a really nice connection when you get that orientation. And that really kind of like embeds me in my research. And my research is involved somebody who's not called Dan. He wasn't in the year 9 and it didn't take place on a Tuesday. That's ethically speaking, that's all that covered. And Dan is a boy who in the school in rural New South Wales that I happened to be teaching at when I moved over here had a red mark in the roll, a red flag in the roll. And red flags never indicate a good thing. And for Dan, he had a list of letters after his name, and he was regarded, loosely speaking, as being like one of the Ritalin kids. So he'd go down at break time to get his medication to even his temperature out. And I'd worked with Dan in a variety of different sort of like classrooms. We'd played sport together and we'd done different classes together. And he was a difficult kid. He was known to be difficult, but I had tips and tricks to work with Dan. I could, right. And we had methods of communicating and stuff. And one Tuesday in an English class, when Dan was in year 9, I got the kids lined up, ready to go into the room. Need your equipment? Got everything you need? Right, okay, you ready to go? And how's your day going? You get them coming in. And Dan's late, he's red in the face, he's kind of sweating. And I say, you're good to come into the lesson, which is one of our shorthand things, like, is everything okay? Teachers do that a lot. We use shorthand a lot just to gain an understanding and that empathy with the kids we're working with. And he didn't make eye contact with me, and I let him come into the classroom. I should have probably stopped him there and then, but I'll work with him. After about 5 minutes of being in the classroom, it was clear that Dan was in no place to be taught. He couldn't settle, couldn't sit, distracting others, out of his seat, moving around, shouting, moving things about, not quite telling me to F off, but not far away. So pushing all of the borders, all of the boundaries. And I'm saying things like, Dan, if you can't behave, I can't have you in my classroom. And he's like, Dan, you understand? Dropping the tone, dropping the eye line, not being confrontational. Do you understand? Have you got this? If you can't settle down, you're going to have to go. And it got to the point where we'd kind of like escalated and Dan had to leave the room. I had to have somebody come and take Dan away. And when you're teaching, that's kind of what you're there for, to teach the kids. And if they're not in the room, you can't teach them. So it's a loss. It's a big thing when a kid gets taken away. And at the next break time, I'm in the staff room, and it's a collegiate staff room. There's not one with all the computers and the workstations and the books. It's just got tables, a coffee machine, somewhere to make a coffee, and a ping pong table. And we sit around the table and we all chat. And it's about, how's your day? And I go, oh, jeez, I've just had a run-in with Dan. Everybody knows Dan. So the sympathies go up, and Dan. And we go on with our day and our chat. And at the end of that meeting, the bell goes and we're off to next class. And a reasonably senior teacher that's well connected in the school, she knows whose mums drink Chardonnay before they come and pick their kids up, or who are driving off in somebody else's car that they shouldn't be, and she knows all the things, takes me to one side and says, you know, his dad's gone to jail. I didn't know his dad had gone to jail. And what's more than that, I didn't know what to do with the information his dad's gone to jail. And at the time, I was looking around for a research project for my master's. And I thought, geez, I'm going to find out more about this. I'm going to work with these kids and find out what I can find out about these kids whose dads, mums have gone to jail. So I go to my current supervisor while I'm doing my master's and say, I want to investigate this. And he goes, no, you can't do that. That's way too hard. You can't do that. You're doing a master's. Your timeline's going to be out the window. It's ethically too challenging, and New South Wales Education will never let you talk to those kids like that. And I went, yeah, but I want to. This is important. It needs doing. I can't find any information about this. And he said, oh, yeah, go think again. And I came back and said, can I talk to teachers about this? Can I talk to my peers about this? And I get the big thumbs up about that. Ethically, that's quite easy to do. It's the shortened ethics application. So off I pop, and I interview teachers that I know, not necessarily in the school where Dan is, but they're my personal teaching network. And I get a group of about 40 teachers, and I find out from them that they didn't know what to do either. They weren't aware of having ever taught a kid whose parents had been incarcerated. And the things that they thought they might do to help this kid out, the literature that I read indicated might not be helpful to those kids. And there's something else on the slide here. Would I let my kid go to the party? This came to me from another senior teacher who had kids, primary school age kids of his own, who found out the research that I was doing, because obviously I'm talking to everybody about it. And subsequently found out that one of the kids in his boys' class at the primary school had a parent in jail, and that kid was having a party. And he had that moment of, oh, I don't know if I want my kid to go to that party. He had that visceral reaction, but he shared it with me. And I think it kind of like highlighted to me some of the issues of the loaded connotations about having a child in jail, the shame and the stigma that these kids go through. So in my research, fishing around for relevant literature, I found this sort of picture. I found that we don't know how many kids are affected because nowhere is it reported. Some places that do collect the information collect it directly from the parents who are in prison.
5 minutes, David.
5 minutes. Okay, so the picture isn't particularly good. Well, I haven't got to the critical realism bit yet. What I've got to is where the research gaps are, because we're not talking to these kids. You can see from the ideas of shame and stigma that there's a lot of social construction gone on around these kids, that they are complicated to work with. They live in a social construct that could be regarded as entangled, that me as a researcher, I've got my big bag of bias that I'm bringing to this research with me, and so do they. And what I need is a method of working with these students that allows me to go fishing wherever I can find something interesting that might be useful, be that what's it like for a brain that's experienced trauma to be told off by a teacher, or what's it like to be suffering shame at that moment in time. And what I found was there were lots of bits of research that were all looking at the same problem with their own individual expertise, but nobody had a holistic view. Nobody had spoken to the children themselves about this. And this is where I found I was able to use something called critical realism to develop something called a depth ontology. Now, in a nutshell, this is from somebody called Bhaskar, and the table on the left is the 3 domains that he envisages. The one that we can measure and we can work with and we can do surveys about and we can talk to is the domain of the empirical, where we measure stuff, where people's constructions and ideas exist. In terms of an epistemic understanding, it's like it's a relativist. I mean, we all have our own understanding of things. Beyond that is the domain of the actual, where mechanisms are taking place. So ideas like criminality, parenting are affecting the way that we think. And underneath all of that is the domain of the real, this concrete domain that we may never actually get an understanding of, but could be, in this context of my research, something to do with why we parent the way we parent, why we are adverse to criminal behavior as a society. So something at the bottom. And all of that is relatable and understandable by talking to the children and having their understanding of their experience with teachers. So why do teachers not necessarily do what's good for those kids? Why in society don't we collect information about those kids in order to help them? So those are the questions that I'm hoping, by working directly with the students, I'll be able to get an understanding of. Okay, so this is kind of like how I use critical realism to develop my research methodology. I'm writing a paper on this for the Journal of Critical Realism, and I've probably spent too long with Dan, to be honest with you. So my research question is simple. What's school like for these children? There's a whole bunch of subordinate research questions that I have. My research methodology is using this depth ontology to allow me to go fishing anywhere I want with influential theories. Atypical development, atypical attachment to teachers, brain plasticity, what it's like to grow up with a range of adverse childhood experiences. And I can use those to inform how I develop my research questions using, and I'm only going to do this for 2 seconds, Bhaskar's 4-planar model of social understanding, which suggests that any one social interaction has driving forces in 4 separate planes to any one particular outcome. They can either increase the likelihood or retard the likelihood. And they essentially exist in, you can quantify pretty much any social interaction using those four. So what the person brings in and of themselves, their internal understanding, what the structures around them are like. So some of the students really quite like when they go to school, having those school structures, it's a place of safety. Some students find that really confronting, that the bell goes and they have no freedom at a particular time and they have to line up because it's an arcane thing. But depending on the individual person, that will be a push or a pull factor. And that's what I'm going to try and use to investigate. And I've used this, I'm going to skip past a whole bunch of these. If you're interested, hopefully this will be in a paper soon. So what I've done is develop a series of questions that respond to different aspects of the four planar that I hope will be indicative of what's going on in those students' minds at that time in relation to their education experience, and particularly that nexus with the teacher, because that's my interaction with Dan. That's perfect. And I wanted to stop bang on time, because who doesn't like an early mark on a Friday? And I realize I've gabbled, but I wanted to give the opportunity to ask some questions rather than just me keep on rolling. So I realize I've hit you on a Friday afternoon with an introduction to critical realism that uses horrible epistemic language and ontological language.
No, you've been a wonderful presenter, actually, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I find it really, rich and interesting project for sure.
Oh,
My antithesis was in working with people with mental illnesses, for instance, and all that sort of stuff. So, we do hope to see you again next year with more progress.
Hopefully, I'll be further down the track. I've recently got the ethics, which is one of the things that Carl and I share. We are working with Liz, and if you have any ethics problems, then she is wonderful at working out quite where the pitfalls are likely to be. And I think we've both gone for a staged approach, and I've just got clearance for my first stage approach.
Excellent.
And because of the difficulty, one of the difficulties with these students is where we find them in school. So they will already have a negative disposition, or are potentially in a negative disposition in school. Teachers think they're at risk. So the children are likely to respond in that manner. So I can't go into schools and talk to them. The other place you can find them is in relation to criminal justice. Who wants to be known as being attached to criminal justice? That's another thing. So I'm reaching out using youth and community work, and using youth and community workers as gatekeepers to help me shape the next phase of the research, which is a reference group that's going to be based in community. And I've just had clearance, and I've just had my work offered to the community in the Tweed Valley Youth organisation. So fingers crossed. In the next bit, I will have a reference group that will allow me to.
Supervisor's chair of the ethics committee, so you're in good hands on that.
Oh.
Now, are there any other questions from the audience, Carl?
Just firstly, great presentation, and
thank you.
I'm so glad that you had a terrible lesson with Dan that day, because if that's the catalyst that got you to here to such important work, that loss of a lesson is definitely a win for the rest of us.
Thank you.
Just kind of reflecting myself as a teacher, I'm sure I've probably worked with students in that situation.
Statistically, you will have done, definitely.
Who have had parents who have been incarcerated. You mentioned that you're going to sort of be finding the students through youth work places. Are you going to, in your research, be speaking to teachers as well? And if you are, how do they necessarily know which students in their classrooms may or may not have had this experience?
Yeah, this is kind of like, thank you for your question, Carl. My master's was working with teachers, working with my network of teachers. I could make it broader, and I think possibly once I've got this, one of the things that I'm hoping to do with the students once I have the work from the reference group is going to help me guide and shape the questions and the structure of where we're going to do, where the work's going to be done, how we're going to make the power balances correct, how we're going to make sure all the gatekeepers are happy and the children understand, the young people understand that they still have the power and their work is valued and this is their story, it's not my story. So once I've done that bit, I have done work with the teachers. One of the things I'd like to do with this down the track is allow the young people who come to, if they would like to, maintain control and use this as part of teacher education. So the young people's story directly as teacher education, be that working with scenarios, working however the young people might want to do it. They might want to directly talk to teachers in that retrospective sense. This is what it was like for me. Because I think that's the most powerful education. I know how teachers respond in meetings. And I don't want it to be a topic of a meeting, but I do want it to work with people like me who are you are likely to come across these kids. And when the kids, you find that piece of information, rather than one of the things that we found is teachers don't want to share this information with other people because they don't trust other teachers with this information. There's certain people I don't want to share this with. I find out. I don't necessarily want it known in school. There's a lot of stigma and a lot of shame. And I think shining the light in the dark place, how we do that will be with the power of the kids.
Yeah, I think we've got time for maybe one more question on that.
Oh, pretty quick. Thanks, David.
That's all right.
Heaps of energy for a Friday after. Well done. I really enjoyed it. It's really interesting. It's complex. What you're doing is that it'd be really interesting to see where this thread goes in that box. Yeah. And just a little comment. I wonder if you might be able to find somehow sources through engaging with, I think in New South Wales they call it the merit system. Mm-hmm. So if people are in trouble, they're going through a program to try and avoid jail, but obviously a fair percentage of them go to jail if that's an early engagement. But I have no idea. I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's the recidivism thing is huge, and I'm almost resigned to the fact that the kids I'm likely to be working with are probably on that trail, which is heartbreaking. So Dan's future is probably already written. I'm thinking of future Dan as well. So the kids I'm likely to be working with, there may be some catharsis, engaging with the research and some power and some giving them some esteem back. But if they've carried this big bag of shame and they've been exposed to the adverse childhood experiences and the impact that they'll have had with the criminal justice system and probably police around the house and the whole range of other things, it's really difficult for that path to be significantly changed by this piece of research. But down the track, future Dan's is, I guess, where I'm aiming. And anything I can do to outreach, once I've got whatever the story these kids give me and however they want to share it, hopefully I'll have something that will be of value.
It mediates one adverse childhood experience, then they've got to score 3 instead of 4, maybe. All the different.
Yeah, true.
All right. Well, look, I think it's time to wrap this one up. So, look, thanks again, David. That's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure we're all with you.